Hi, everyone. Welcome to Hope and Healing Chats, where we discuss everything dealing with sex addiction and betrayal trauma. Our goal is that these conversations assist you on your healing journey and help to restore hope. My name is Monifa Ellis Addy. I am a CSAT as well as a betrayed partner specialist. I work at the Banyan Therapy Group in Los Angeles, where I help individuals and couples deal with sex addiction and betrayed partner issues. Today, we're going to be talking about boundaries. But first, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. So today's guest, we have the clinical director of Banyan Therapy Group in Los Angeles. He is a CSAT and betrayed partner specialist, and he is a co-author of many books in this field, like one called Healthy Boundaries, which is going to help us dig into our topic today. Today we have Dan Drake. Thanks, Dan. Welcome to the show again.
Thanks for having me.
So, as you know, boundaries can be extremely nuanced. It's something that comes up constantly because it's kind of like the hallmark and base point that we start off with when we're doing this kind of treatment. So I notice that most often, if not all the time, when I start talking about boundaries, the response is, well, I've never had boundaries before. And the truth of the matter fact is, most of us weren't taught boundaries growing up. So it's not something that we even come into relationships with. So it's kind of have to start from scratch. So can you help us with what exactly, what are boundaries?
Well, boundaries at their core are ways to keep, let's talk specifically partners, keep the partner safe and rebuild some safety and stabilization back in the relationship. I mean, I often say when a partner's creating boundaries, they're a roadmap towards
Hmm.
safety rebuilding in the relationship.
Now, if you're a sex addict, though, what would boundaries be? Because the definition does switch up, it does change.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a tricky one because when you think of, let me just back up for a second. If what gets eroded after betrayal, so trust gets eroded, safety gets eroded. There's no foundation of honesty or truth in the relationship. That's what gets taken. So to me, how do we start to rebuild some of those things for the betrayed partner? They want to have some assurance that the addict is telling the truth, that they're doing what they say they're doing, that all the things that led to the lies and deceptions and all those things that we're shoring up whatever the problems were. So there's a lot that we need to do relationally and that the addict can do to restore that safety and trust for the relationship and for the partner to restore safety for themselves and for how they show up in the relationship. That's a lot different than sometimes we'll get addicts saying, well, I have boundaries too, which is true, but think that we have to start with the foundation of the rupture that happened as a result of the impact of sex addiction and betrayal. That's a lot different because the addict does not have that same level of rupture that the partner is experiencing. So we all deserve boundaries. We all deserve having certain things respected for safety. But I think we have to start with that foundation because when I hear the addict saying that, partner says, oh, I have my boundaries, and the addict pretty quickly says, oh, I have my boundaries too, it feels like we're trying to make it even or something. And
Hmm.
we're just not in an even playing field when you have that level of rupture. So to me, certain things that are for everybody, nobody deserves, like everybody deserves to not be abused. So physical abuse, emotional abuse, we all should have that, you know, boundary around that safety for ourselves in a relationship. So the partner, for partners, I completely get the anger. It gets, there's so much anger, so much hurt, so much betrayal, big feelings. Totally makes sense. This is so traumatizing. That doesn't for anybody give license to then be abusive back. So I think there's certain things on the addict side, certain needs that they may have for for they may have certain boundaries. I always want to start with it needs to be accountability informed first. Like they're showing up, they're doing their part. It's not coming from a victim stance. It's saying, I completely damaged the safety and trust in our relationship. I created this rupture. Here's what I'm going to be continuing to double down and do to rebuild that safety and trust. Here's some things that would help me do that in a safer way in our relationship. I guess that's the one version of that for the addict, but it looks so different for them versus the partner.
And then also for the addict, I always like to stress that their boundaries are usually going to be more recovery related. So, like if we're dealing with an alcoholic, They might have the boundary of, I don't go after work to the bar with my coworkers. That's your personal boundary. Because at its core, boundaries are things to keep you emotionally, mentally, and healthy, like, and safe. So if the sex addiction is the thing that's, you know, keeps you mentally unhealthy and emotionally unhealthy and unsafe, then what are the things that boundaries that we need to put around that? So, when you go on work trips that you, what is it? As some people I know, they put their electronics in the car when they go on work trips. That's their own personal boundary because they know that's the thing that's going to make them unsafe is having the electronics there overnight. So it's like, it's not, yes, it's still safety, but it's not necessarily relational with the partner safety.
That's a really good point because I think, yeah, we could. I was thinking more of the relational type boundaries, but you're right. For the addict, a lot of their boundaries are going to be around what's needed for successful personal recovery, which also does have impacts on the relationship. Knowing some people, um, they may limit, they may put certain boundaries for themselves, saying, I, for whatever reason, I, when I'm on such and such social media account, it's not good for me or for my recovery, so I'm choosing not to be on that or have limits with it,
Mm-hmm.
or you know, there might be something, I don't have any private accounts of any kind. Like, there's, my partner has access to, there's no secrets going on with my accounts. Or there might be something, yeah, like you said, around um, certain things that the person may do or not do. I've had people, especially early on, uh, they may travel a lot for business, and we have to determine like what's actually, they'll say it's necessary. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes they
Mm-hmm.
don't need to. They're choosing to. And are there some
Mm-hmm.
of those things that we set some boundaries? Like right now, we're not going to travel for unless there's such and such reason. Those are, I think, some of those things. Boundaries, if you look at it, it's kind of like um, think of it like a fence around a yard. I mean, these things are keeping, they're protecting us. Like there was this study, I forgot when it was, but around children at the playground, they did this study, and the children at a playground without a fence will use only a certain percentage of the playground
Hmm.
because they won't go near to the street because it's not as safe. So they'll stay closer to, they'll let's say closer to a building that was there. Um, Once they put a fence up around the playground, the kids will use the whole playground. So these
Oh, that's
fences are
wonderful.
actually protective. They keep us, everything inside here keeps us safe. So saying, okay, outside of the zone, I'm not safe. So how do I keep in here to keep myself or my relationship safe? So that's the, at its core, I think, what to look at it. It helps keep us safe. These parameters that keep us safe.
What I like about that, it made me think of when you have boundaries, there's more space for movement, right? Where if you don't have boundaries, everything is like, it's tense, it's tight knit, the kids stay close to the building. But now when there's a parent, like, it's set, like, I know I can move around and do more within these parameters.
Right. Which feels counterintuitive because,
Yeah.
and I'm speaking on the addict side now, most people when I talk to, when the partner's coming up with their list of boundaries, their experience, instead of actually there's some freedom in this, there's movement, there's the ability to have freedom with movement. It's actually, oh no, I'm going to be, it's for punishment, it's control, it's restriction. That's how they're taking it.
Yeah.
Um, so for, and we wrote, this is part of the book on the addict side. I have to say, I can't specify enough for the addict to understand, like, these are roadmaps for your partner to rebuild safety. If your partner's creating a list of boundaries that says they actually care enough about you and the relationship to say, these are the things I'm going to need for us to move forward together, and you don't have to guess, they're literally spelling out, these are the things that will help me feel safer to move more freely in our relationship. So if you choose to go towards, I'm being punished, controlled, and I'm, resistant to that stuff, it's communicating to your partner that their safety needs aren't important to you, and then they will probably need to do other things to keep themselves safe because you're not willing to do that with them. So it's so important to what we do, and yet, like you said, I mean, this is so difficult for couples healing from rupture, betrayal.
And if they take the defensive route, once again, that in itself is constricting. Like, the view is constricting, it constricts the relationship rather than going along with the roadmap. Now the partner can move around more freely. unbeknownst to the addict, at first you can actually move around more freely now too, because now we have the fence up around what can be done. I love that. I didn't know about that research. I'm going to
Yeah, I
start
don't
to
know
take
the specific study, but there was, and it was a while ago, but there was something, and I agree. There's something really powerful about it.
yeah, no, I'm going to look that up. But then now it gets tricky. So, can people misuse boundaries?
Yeah, well, I guess that we have to. What are boundaries? Because I think our field, like that's such a big. Everybody knows the term, but what are we talking? Are they requests that I make of somebody else? Are they things I'm doing for myself? Where's the line between those two? Like for example, I think not uncommon. A partner, what was the addict in active addiction kept secrets. They lied. There was deception. So something that's going to be so critical for the partner is transparency. Having that transparency, because that wasn't there. That was eroded. How do we? So what are boundaries we have around transparency? What does the partner um, is the request to, like, I need to have access to your phone, or your any kind of email account or other social media account. Is that going too far? Is that a boundary? Is that a request? I don't know. Like, I'm curious what you think. Is that normal and expected?
A little of everything all at once. Because once again, it depends on the couple and what we're talking about and what the discovery was. And then also, I like to check in with the partner of what is this really doing for you? Or depending on where they are in recovery, pointing out like, okay, this level of intensity might be okay now, but then if we are, 3 months, 6 months into this, because that's another thing, to check in with boundaries, right? Because if we're going about this correctly and there's consistency and safety is being developed, the level of boundaries right after discovery is not going to look the same 3 months, 6 months, or whatever after discovery. So they're really adamant about it. I'm like, okay, let's leave it there for now. We'll check in on it, a month from now and see how you still feel about it. Because maybe that is the thing that just makes them feel safe in that moment. But then sometimes, and I see this happen all the time, it's very intense. Then they realize that that thing is triggering them.
Right.
Like, if they have, Covenant Eyes or one of those accountability apps, the ding, the notification now for Covenant Eyes is now become a triggering thing. So they don't even want to
Mm-hmm.
know about the charge. Just like give it to your sponsor, like let them deal with it because they don't want it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not uncommon for it to be high level, high intensity, could seem evasive, maybe boundaries at first. And then as time goes off, they kind of just drop off.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. And there's a few things from what you said I think are important, because oftentimes, we think of boundaries early on, what partners might need early on for safety stabilization. I think of traffic cone boundaries versus guardrail boundaries. That, I think, that might
Mhm.
be a good way to visualize it. So if
Mhm.
I'm in a mountain pass, there's those fixed guardrails, and that's going to keep me from going off the mountain. Those aren't going to be changing. Those are fixed. Aside from erosion or something, those things are staying there. They're staying put, because that's where the boundary is. If you go past this, you're falling off a cliff. Those things stay. That those are some line in the sand things that the partner may say. This is fixed. I'm not okay with you doing X, Y, and Z behaviors like that. For me to move forward in this relationship, you know, this is not. I can't be in a relationship where someone's acting out in such and such ways. Early on, though, I mean, think of traffic cone. If there's, you know, uh, let's say potholes in the road, or in LA example, or just things that are dangerous, some traffic accident, we might put safety traffic cones out there as a way to temporarily divert traffic, or a way to temporarily provide a safer route. Those aren't going to be that way forever. So some of those things, I do think boundaries can live and breathe. And some of the things that someone might need right now, for example, maybe around touch, right before, right after disclosure. I don't, for the partner, I don't want you to touch my body unless I initiate it, of any kind. No touch. Like that may not be that way forever. There's going
Mm-hmm.
to be some changes with that, but for a time period that makes sense because that touch was violated and that doesn't feel safe for the partner. So I think that might be something that lives and breathes. um, I haven't avoided your question. I was going to go back to it if that's okay. um, I wanted to think though, is first, isn't it important though to, what's the spirit of boundaries? If it's for safety, then the way we've talked about it and the way we've addressed it, it needs to start. What are my core values? I think that's for the partner to
Mm-hmm.
look at. If I'm addressing boundaries, I want to first look at what are my values, what are my biggest needs. So that's where we start with the visioning in the book. We start with that, right? Like the
Yeah.
visioning for what are my values. Is it transparency? Is it honesty? Is it love, respect? What are these kind of these big values that I have of who I want to be, how I want to be treated in a relationship, what I'm going to need from a relationship partner to move forward. Start there, because any boundaries should stem from my values. If
Yeah, no,
right,
completely.
and if they don't, that's, I think, the outlier things. What am I using these things for? If I'm feeling so upset, and I'm so angry, I'm so devastated, if the injustice is so real, and all that's true, but yet my significant other doesn't seem to get it. He doesn't seem to care. He doesn't seem to show any empathy or remorse. And I just want him to suffer. I want him to feel the pain that I feel. And so I'm going to put a list of things that I want him to pay for what he did. I get
Mm-hmm.
it. I do get it. That's not a boundary. That's something different. So I think what you're saying, I think that's where it can get misused. If I want him to, I do want to punish him because I've been so devastated. Again, the feeling and the experience makes total sense. I totally get it, but that's not where the spirit of boundaries comes from. It's not for
Yeah.
safety. That's for something different.
Yes. And in addition to that, on the addict side, because I'll hear this in groups sometimes, um, that's like, well, they throw out, well, that's my boundary. I need clean dishes at the end of every night
Oh,
because that's my boundary. And it's like, well, it's not really a boundary. That's more of, a request would be nice, but that's not a boundary. And then they kind of like stand 10 toes down on it. Well, this is my boundary. You're violating my boundary. I'm like, well, now this is feeling a little more gaslighty. This isn't
well, I go
necessarily
go
feeling
back
like
to
a
that.
boundary.
Okay, can you make a case why doing the dishes at the end of the day helps your safety in the relationship? If that
Yeah.
reestablish, is there something? And maybe you can. Well, part of how the person acted out was they let things go in the house and they weren't taking care of business. So this makes me feel really unsafe when I start to see the house not being taken care of. Okay, now we're closer. There's something
Yeah.
about that. But if it's literally like, hey, I want my house to be cleaner and I want you to do this, that feels different to me.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's important what you said, like, let's bring it down to the values. Because how you started like pulling the thread, kind of like, okay, so where does that link to? Because then we can link that all the way back to like, feeling alone, loneliness in the home because you didn't have a partner that helped you clean up the house or whatever the case may
Yeah.
be. So it's like, okay, so now it actually got somewhere
And that's
instead.
different. That the energy, if I'm okay, I really need a partner to show up and be a partner with me. That's different than like, I need you to do this task because because that's my boundary. Like there's no
Yeah,
like there's a
we
different
need
energy.
more.
And if someone, hopefully we can help as professionals, we can help that translate. If the addict doesn't understand why that is significant, we can help them understand, no, that actually is linked to how you can show up as a partner where you failed.
Yeah. And I also think it's important to point out that because you talked about like the line in the sand, the guardrail versus the cones, like there are different types of boundaries. Like some are negotiable. Yes, saying it right. Negotiable versus non-negotiable. And many times partners will be like, "Well, no, it's all of it's not negotiable." And it's like, well, we still want to do things within reason. If you're saying that you need them to check in with you when they're leaving work at 3:05, every day because that's the normal time they leave work. What about the days when they have a meeting that goes over late? Like, what does that look like? And many times addicts will just kind of be like, oh, I just have to do this thing. And then they can't necessarily follow through, but they don't say anything. And because they don't say anything about how they couldn't follow through, like we missed the negotiation that could happen, which in actuality is like an exercise to bring them closer and have them work together.
Right. Yeah, I think of a situation. The addict partner shared some boundaries. Addict brought them in, and one boundary was, I need you to pick up your phone by the third ring. Period. Like when I call you, I need you to pick up the phone by the third ring if I call you. And I get it. So I get where it's coming from, because a person, let's
Mm-hmm.
say they turned off their phone, they're unavailable, unreachable, and that was part. So the partner is saying, I want to know that you're going to answer, and you're not going to go MIA from me. That there's a part where I can actually have some connection if I need it from you, and reassurance. I wanted to know though. Okay, is that what happened? Do you go to a 12-step meetings? She calls you in the middle of a 12-step meeting. What do you do then? Or do you have business meetings where you can't,
Mm-hmm.
are there situations where that's not possible or realistic? And then, and they're like, well, yeah, of course. Well, now we've got a problem, because if you're saying, yes, I'll do that, and you can't actually follow through with that, we've got a big problem. So to your point, the negotiation is not like, no, that's not reasonable, I can't do that. It's, let's look at the spirit of it. Validate. I completely get why you need that. You need me to show up. I don't know that I can do for these. There's certain occasions where I won't be able to be reachable, and such, give some examples. Here's what I would suggest. If I'll text you before I go into a meeting, and that I expect it to be this long, and then I'll text you afterwards, and then we can check in about it. So they're actually coming up with an alternative to try and meet the same safety
Mm-hmm.
needs. They're being proactive about it, instead of just saying, well, that wasn't reasonable, there's no way I could possibly keep that boundary. But for the addict, if you're agreeing to these boundaries and you don't actually think they're reasonable or realistic, we've got a big problem, because the partner
Mm-hmm.
is taking you at face value. And if you don't follow through with them, then it's gonna erode safety and trust in the relationship, because that's the other piece of boundaries. If we know for partners, they're going to wait and see, does the addict's words and actions line up? And that if they do, that's going to build trust. If the addict says, yes, I'll follow these boundaries, but doesn't have any intention to do it, or under certain circumstances, then it's going to erode trust. So it's really actually pretty important to understand what we're agreeing to with boundaries, and see
Uh-huh.
what's that's why I know it's not I know it can be triggering for partners to have a discussion about the boundaries or negotiation, but I would rather that than what I've experienced sometimes, where what you don't want is where partner spends all this time really thinking about, what boundaries do I need to build safety. They share these with the addict, and then the addict just agrees to them because they, quote, feel backed into a corner and they have no choice. But then at some point they abandon the boundaries completely, or they just start failing to follow them, and then now we're actually not building trust and safety back in the relationship. It's eroding it. So I mean, it's hard to do that. I understand that's not easy to have negotiation, but I'd much rather that than have the partner feel completely unsafe later.
Which leads to the something else that comes up often is I made my boundary, but they don't follow them. Now what? And then sometimes the partner's like, well, then no point in placing a boundary. I'm like, well, that's not necessarily true. Um, because it's not, once again, not meant to control them. They can do whatever they want with it. And there's a lot of information in that. If they come with alternatives and negotiate and things like that, that's going to communicate something to your partner way different than just being like, oh, I couldn't do that and just abandoning it altogether.
Right. Or it's too much work for me to enforce whatever consequences I had, so I'm just gonna not do that, or let this one slide, or then abandon the boundary after the fact. That sometimes
Yeah.
happens.
Which we'll put a pin in that because I do want to go to consequences, like because I feel like that gets very tricky also. But I also wanted to point out the importance of writing down the boundaries.
Thank you.
Lots
Yes.
of times they're in their head, and it's like, well, we talked about it, and then there's all this different understanding, or didn't remember, or whatever the
Right.
case may be.
Yeah, I took that for granted. Like, yes, I was assuming we have to write them, because I don't know how to better say it. Addicts rewrite history sometimes. They'll no, this is what I agreed to when it's, but when you haven't, and then it's now, he said, she said, well, that's not what I said. And
Mhm.
then now we're talking about something that there's no win there. So yeah, having it written down, and this may be too extreme. Sometimes people will actually sign the list, like your signature's on here saying you were going to agree to these things. Um, but yeah, writing it is important for sure.
And if you have a treatment team, like with us at Banyan, if a partner gives me a copy of their boundaries, now I have a copy, the addict has a copy, the addict's therapist has a copy, everyone has a copy of these boundaries. So
Right.
everyone's on the same page, which is important.
Yeah, and that's actually really important on the addicts side too. If I'm the addicts therapist, because I want to keep that. I want to keep so I we don't lose sight of it, and for the addict too, like you need to keep. Don't forget these things. Don't forget them because these are really important. If you don't think for also too the ones that maybe the traffic cone boundaries, if you don't think they apply anymore, have a conversation about it.
Yeah.
Don't just say, oh, it doesn't apply anymore and stop doing it. I mean, I can't, that happens all the time. And maybe
Hmm.
the partner didn't even remember. That's possible. But what you do is say, hey, I've noticed this was one of your boundaries. Does it still apply the same way? Or, is this still, or can we shift it? Or I'm seeing it's not happening this way. Is there an update? Like what you do, that's the opportunity. You showed, hey, your boundaries were really important to me. I'm not sure this one applies anymore. You're bringing it back relationally, so your partner can make that choice, but they also get to see, oh, okay, you took my boundaries seriously, and you're
Yeah.
checking in about it, not just disregarding them because you don't think they apply anymore.
Yeah. Which, okay, so taking the pen out of consequences. So as you talk about boundaries are for safety, I always like framing consequences are okay, the thing didn't happen. Now, what needs to happen to maintain safety or
Right.
to regain safety? Which can sometimes be misconstrued as punishment for not doing the boundaries. So, what's the difference? Like we have boundaries versus control. What's the difference between consequences versus punishment?
Uh, Maybe thinking of it in that fence analogy, the consequences are the thing. Something happened, the fence didn't hold up for whatever reason, or there's some breach. The punishment is I'm focusing on the other side of the fence on the other person. The consequence is more on this side of the fence, thinking, okay, here's a
Mhm.
breach of my fence. What do I need to do to regain that safety back because of that breach? So punishment, I think, is about the consequence is more for reestablishing that fence and safety for myself. Um, I always, again, I think that's where because some people maybe never learned, like you said, maybe have never had boundaries. They never learned how to set them or keep them from their own past potentially. I think if we can, again, starting going back to the values, what was the value where this boundary came from in the first place? Was it, if there's some core value that's so important to me, transparency, let's say, or honesty, and I found out you lied to me, for whatever reason about something, what the consequence should come from that value somewhere.
Mhm.
If you are not invested in doing this boundary, and that says to me that you don't value this certain need and value that I have, so this is what I'm going to do to protect myself. That's where I think the spirit of the consequence should come from. I've found some people, they do feel like a list of punishments. If you do this, I will do that. um, that's one way to do it. One thing that I've found can sometimes trap partners. I don't know if you see it this way too, but when there's this, if you do this, I will do that list of boundaries, sometimes the person does this, and then you might realize, oh, I don't actually want the consequence I wrote
Yeah.
down. I want to do
Yeah.
something different. And now what?
Mhm.
If you I feel like sometimes you paint yourself into a corner by saying, if we don't know what's going to happen if this thing, what I might choose to do if this thing does happen in the future. So I really like to have people have options for themselves, not say this is the one thing
Mhm.
I'll do. um, and I know that gets tricky, especially with the non-negotiable ones. But I've seen partners be like, well, I did say this was my consequence, but now I actually don't feel like enforcing this consequence. I feel like something different for myself. and now I feel like I'm a liar, or I'm not keeping my own integrity if I don't follow
Exactly.
my consequences, or he's going to see that I'm not holding my own boundaries. It just I don't know. It feels like it can paint you in a corner.
Yeah. And not for nothing, sometimes the consequence is just a natural consequence.
True.
Um, like the example you gave about honesty. If you have a new discovery and they're dishonest, okay, now naturally you're just going to pull away, and become more guarded because we were working towards safety, and that it wasn't working. Now you've disregarded the boundary and did what you wanted to do. So now I become more reserved. And then maybe in turn, I lean more into, I find a therapy recovery group. Let's say I'm already doing S&M, but now I add more stuff to my recovery package to get more stable for myself, because that's the stuff that's going to make me safe. So now the consequences, like you said, staying on your side of the street is like, okay, what do I need to do to keep myself safe in this situation, or to maintain so I don't fall down the rabbit hole of this new discovery?
Yeah, which is interesting because I think there's still like caring for my own safety, but I do think there can be requests as consequences too. So let's
Hmm.
say it is honesty that gets ruptured. I found out you lied about, I don't know, something small, not sexual related. Well, that causes me to question, if you're lying about this thing, it erodes my safety and trust in you for the big stuff that I thought you were sober. Maybe I am requesting, I really, this really rattled me, and I have a hard time rebuilding this sense of honesty in the relationship. I really need you to take a polygraph because I'm not sure I
Hmm.
trust you with your sobriety. So to
Yeah.
me, that could be, it's that feels different. I'm going to punish you with a polygraph. That's not punishment. It's saying, okay, now my foundation of this value and honesty in the relationships eroded. So I'm gonna find a way to shore that up potentially and make this request that would help me show that you're okay. You actually are being honest in the other areas,
Yeah, which is once again right in line with the core value.
right?
So it's like we just follow the core value all the way down. It helps to inspire the boundaries, which will help to inspire the consequence, so it
I,
doesn't float off into the
Totally, and
sea.
especially for those, I've worked with a number of partners that have trouble, like, oh, I don't want to, like, they have difficulty enforcing a boundary, right? Like that's difficult for them. For those, if you start with the core values, at some point, like if I'm starting with my own core values and that's where the boundary's starting from, then I have to decide, if I don't enforce this on some level, I have to make a choice. I'm actually betraying my own core values at that point. So
Yeah.
there becomes more of a choice. Do I abandon myself in this, or do I, to for whatever reason, to avoid the conflict or appeasing or something, or do I actually, like, there's now a different choice. It's not just some arbitrary boundary. It's actually saying these are so core to my values, and now I have to decide, am I going to uphold these or abandon myself? And I think that's a different conversation than, because sometimes it'll be focused on this one specific boundary, but if we say no, if this is linked to something much bigger than this one
Hmm.
thing, then that actually does have bigger consequences for yourself if you choose to keep or not keep
Yeah.
enforcing the boundary.
Um, and I think all in all, it's important to just use your treatment team, hopefully that you have one, in communicating the boundaries, because it's not uncommon for there to be pushback of some sort.
Right.
Um, so it's good to have your team around to help explain and dig this out. I know when I'm working with a partner with boundaries, sometimes it takes 3, 4 sessions to even lock it down concrete, and then another 3, 4 sessions for the addict to understand how these boundaries work. So like being patient and taking your time with it. It's not something expected to just shoot out and be done with.
Right.
Well, that's all I have, Dan. Do you have anything else to say about boundaries?
Uh, I just a couple things, if that's okay for the addict.
Hmm.
Um, we mentioned a couple. I just want to make this may sound completely obvious, but understand the boundaries, understand what you're signing up for. Like you're not backed into a corner, even if you feel that way. Like these are really something that you need to understand in order to provide safety for the relationship. And if you don't understand them or if you don't agree to them, let's have that conversation now. Also, for now, honor the boundaries letter of the law. If it's written a certain way, honor it that way.
Hmm.
Not just,
Yeah.
making, interpretations about what you think it is. If you don't understand it, let's be as clear as possible, because your partner, how we rebuild safety and trust is your words and your actions lining up. If you're not following those things, you're going to erode that safety and trust. So follow it, letter of the law. Revisit it, keep them in mind, review them every day or at least every week. Have them in a place where, because people forget about them, and then your partner's not going to forget about their boundaries. Typically, you're going to forget
Mm-hmm.
quicker. So
Yeah.
keep them in mind, keep them, part of your recovery team, check-ins for yourself to see, are you doing these things? Because that will help things speed up for you and your relationship. If you continue to breach the boundaries, it's going to really, really slow down progress for where you could be.
If you're having trouble wanting to figure out how to put boundaries together, do know that the details, amongst other things, are in the book that we co-wrote called Healthy Boundaries, the second edition. And if you want to reach Dan or myself, or just reach out to the show, the details are also in the description. And make sure you like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you have not done so already. And remember to embrace your healing journey. Every step forward brings a new hope for tomorrow.